Have you ever finished watching a movie and thought, this is great, can't wait for the sequel? And then when you actually saw the sequel, you said to yourself, man, they really should have left this alone after one? Well then this is the show for you. Welcome to Sequelpalooza.
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 Sequel.
The series that takes a hit movie, asks what happened next, and discovers that it's usually a complete and utter mess. In each episode, we'll be telling the story of a different film series from across the decades. And today... hello? Oh, hi, boss. Yes, good, thanks. Just introducing the new episode of Sequelpalooza. Oh, okay. You want an episode suitable for Halloween? Right. Uh-huh. What were you thinking? Is that a Halloween movie? Wasn't it released in August? And didn't the sequel not make it out until November? Ah, right. We want something that works for Halloween but isn't too much Halloween, so that it can still get views for the channel for the rest of the year? Gotcha. In that case, yes sir, werewolves are Halloweeny, and lots of people do dress up like them for Halloween, and that sequel is considered terrifyingly terrible. Okay, great, thanks boss, brilliant work as always. Teen Wolf it is. Whether you're watching this at the spookiest time of year or not, today we'll be covering a hair-raisingly scary example of that most horrifying of cultural artifacts, a really bad sequel. Arriving at the ideal moment to ride the crest of the wave of Hollywood's most bankable new name, the small-scale monster comedy Teen Wolf became a hit despite a less than perfect critical response in the summer of 1985, making more than 20 times its budget in cinemas alone. 2 years later, however, without its headliner and attempting to pull off the same trick, with essentially the original movie copy and pasted, Teen Wolf 2 became a frighteningly iconic example of how spookily awful follow-up films really can be. How did the original Teen Wolf manage to shapeshift its way to becoming a breakout hit? Where did it all go wrong for a sequel that failed to show nearly as much bite? And is there any party quite like an 80s werewolf party?
Number 60, from Teen Wolf 2.
A sequel that will leave you howling at the moon. Ow! This is Sequelpalooza. In the summer of 1985, the WWF was becoming a major force in the entertainment business after the massive success of March's very first WrestleMania. Eddie Murphy had just hosted the second MTV Video Music Awards, and July's Live Aid charity concerts had been seen by an estimated worldwide TV audience of over 1.5 billion people. At cinemas, the biggest film of the summer, and eventually the entire year, was in the process of sending its young star's fame into the stratosphere. It's hard to quantify just how hot Michael J. Fox was in the summer of '85. Having already become a star in the role of Alex on Family Ties, it was his part in Robert Zemeckis' Back to the Future that would be the secret to even bigger success for the young Canadian actor. Though he had been the first choice for the role of Marty McFly, Fox hadn't been the original lead actor in Back to the Future, as his Family Ties schedule clashed with filming of the movie. After a few weeks of filming, however, he did end up replacing Eric Stoltz, who producers felt just wasn't working in the role. It's wild to think that there's an alternative timeline without Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future, but that was very nearly everyone's reality. The timeline we did get saw Marty and Doc's movie make its debut in North American cinemas on July 3rd, 1985 and become an instant sensation. Spending 11 of the next 12 weeks in the #1 spot at the box office, it would eventually go on to become the 5th highest grossing film of the 1980s and hold a position as a true classic that will surely never change. Michael J. Fox, already a teen idol thanks to Family Ties, was suddenly now a truly bankable film star as well. The all-conquering scale of Back to the Future was also incredibly good news for a smaller scale werewolf comedy that Fox had made months prior to him being installed in the blockbuster of the year, especially when that other film was now scheduled for release in August of '85. Less than 2 months after Back to the Future had crash-landed into cinemas and the wider cultural zeitgeist. In late 1984, as Robert Zemeckis' film was going into production on the Universal lot with Eric Stoltz still as its lead, Michael J. Fox had been in another part of California, making Teen Wolf, a coming-of-age werewolf comedy drama under the direction of Rod Daniel. Director Daniel had made a lot of episodes of TV prior to securing the Teen Wolf job, but he longed to make a movie. As soon as he read the script from fellow film debutantes Matthew Wiseman and Jeff Loeb, he knew this was the project for him. As Daniel remembers, he got the job as he was the only director who didn't see it as a werewolf movie, but instead saw it as the story of a father and son. Which is true, but it's also about a basketball playing werewolf. Anyway, werewolf movies were kind of trendy at that point. The likes of An American Werewolf in London and The Howling had been hits earlier in the decade, and The Howling 2, which was given the awesome subtitle Your Sister is a Werewolf, was released the same month as Teen Wolf. Though we'd already seen high school werewolves on screen before in the likes of 1981's horror comedy Full Moon High, Michael J. Fox's creature feature could follow on from these films, but with a different tone, whilst also tapping into the teen market. The teen wolf market? Teen market? Anyway, Atlantic Releasing, the studio behind the film, wanted a cheap and cheerful teen comedy which could potentially live up to the success of their 1983 Nicolas Cage star Valley Girl, and Teen Wolf was certainly cheap and cheerful. Though the exact production budget is a matter for conjecture, according to Fox, the pure cost of making the film came at little more than $1 million, with additional post-production, marketing and distribution costs taking that up to roughly $4 million. Either way, this was far from an expensive film, with the hope being that its star's name value from Family Ties would carry it into profit. And that was before his star went supernova. As it happens, Teen Wolf was unlikely to be made without Fox being attached, but when his Family Ties co-star Meredith Baxter became pregnant, her time off allowed just enough of a window of opportunity for him to make the film before going back to the day job. Fox himself has reflected on the fact that he largely took the role as it was a job and he needed more exposure if he was going to succeed as a movie star. It was a low-budget, silly movie, but at that point, I needed all the visibility I could get. The story of Teen Wolf revolved around Fox's Scott, an unremarkable Nebraska teenager who plays for his high school's god-awful Beavers basketball team, although he does have an awesome best friend called Styles, played by Jerry Levine. Scott fancies Laurie Griffin's Pamela, his dream girl who is going out with classic 80s teen movie Meathead Mick, played by Mark Arnold. Sadly, Scott can't see that his best mate Booth, aka Susanoo City, both fancies him and could be the one. Scott starts to notice a lot of weird things going on with his body, and a game which sees him and Booth snogging in the cupboard goes wrong when he starts to show werewolf-like tendencies, before he goes full werewolf later that night at home. His father Harold explains that it's a family curse, but he was hoping it might skip a generation or two. Initially aiming to keep it hidden to the world at large, Scott instead werewolves up during a Beavers game, eventually leading his team on a winning streak as wolf fever sweeps the school. Drifting apart from Booth with fame increasing, will Scott discover what's really important in life or be consumed by the trappings of his new success? Can Scott learn to control his new wolf alter ego? Can the team of no-hopers actually take it all the way to the championship title? And Can the filmmakers find an epic 80s werewolf-themed banger to play at the high school spring dance? I think we know the answer to that last question. Teen Wolf went into production in late 1984, with the shoot wrapped in little more than 3 weeks. During filming, Fox agreed to replace Eric Stoltz in the role of Marty McFly in the new year, which meant that his upcoming schedule would become insane, starring in the next series of Family Ties and Back to the Future simultaneously, but his stardom would become equally ridiculous because of it. Atlantic Releasing initially planned to put Teen Wolf out in cinemas before the summer of '85, but as Back to the Future's production commenced and later test screenings for the Robert Zemeckis movie were coming back incredibly strong, they pivoted their schedule to maximise the reciprocal impact of this potential monster hit. It was agreed that Teen Wolf would instead drop more than a month after Back to the Future, which you have to acknowledge is a pretty genius bit of business. In the end, Teen Wolf was released in North America on August 23rd, 1985, meaning that it would not only be jumping on board the Fox hype train, but also still potentially be in cinemas for Halloween. Critical responses to the movie were a tad scary. Most reviews at the time didn't like it much, even though Fox was generally acknowledged as an engaging lead. Assessments range from the script and the direction are simply too lazy, to innocuous and well-intentioned, but terribly feeble, and determinedly bland and unoriginal, to another example of a decent idea yielding the least imaginative results conceivable. As the New York Times review summed it up, for a film that's so innocuous, Teen Wolf is aggressively boring. The thing is though, even if critics had considerable power still at the time, that power was dwarfed by the value of Michael J. Fox in the summer of '85. Teen Wolf's box office takings exceeded its budget in the first weekend of release, when it raked in over $6 million to finish in second place on the charts to Back to the Future, of course. The Fox 1-2 placing remained for 4 weeks in total, as Teen Wolf surfed the wave of momentum. In the end, the film stayed in US cinemas until December, and as it was released in countries across the globe over the coming months, that momentum remained. This small teen werewolf movie ended up grossing over $80 million in worldwide cinemas. Even if it did shamelessly piggyback off Back to the Future in some markets, such as in Brazil, where it was given the subtitle of O Garoto do Futuro, which translates as Boy of the Future, despite the fact that the film featured absolutely 0 instances of time travel.
Teen Wolf, o Garoto do Futuro.
Shameless? Sure, but the results were undeniable. No sense in fighting against the power of momentum, I guess. Fox later accepted that he had underestimated the cultural impact Teen Wolf could have. I was shocked that it was as big as it was. I thought it would just come and go, but people loved it. Teen Wolf isn't some earth-shattering masterpiece or a major artistic statement, but I think, as I often do when reflecting on reviews from the time, that the critics were harsh. Whether nostalgia-driven or not, I'm a big fan. It's just so watchable and is an early, easygoing demonstration of how good a movie star Michael J. Fox would become. It's ridiculous, charming, well cast and acted, has a light satirical take on the vanity of fame, a moral lesson about understanding what really matters in life, and it's all wrapped up in a neat 92-minute package.
Oh, I see. Then everything is wrapped up in a neat little package. Really, I mean that. Sorry if it sounded sarcastic.
I mean, Fox's best mate in the movie, Rupert Stiles, is so cool that, in 2008, he inspired an American footballer called Greg White to change his legal name to Styles G. White. So, yeah, there's that. Really, what's not to like about Teen Wolf? It wouldn't have been as big a hit without its newly minted lead actor, but I'm glad it became one. Movies like this don't seem to make it to cinemas much anymore, and I wish they did. Not only was Teen Wolf a comparative smash on the big screen, but Atlantic were quick to further capitalise by getting the thing out on video just a few months later. continuing to push the value of Fox's other 1985 starring appearance, the movie was able to ride the mid to late 80s VHS boom for years to come in a considerable second wave.
Teen Wolf, a new comedy with Michael J. Fox, star of Back to the Future.
So much so, in fact, that not long after its release, it was clear that Teen Wolf would become a franchise opportunity. Not only was a cartoon TV series in the works, but a sequel film had also been given the green light, with, or more likely without, Michael J. Fox on board. Hi boss, yep, no need for the Halloween effects now. Thanks boss, yeah, I think the episode's going pretty well so far. Any notes? Right, yeah, okay. So you want a bit more spookiness for the Halloween crew watching this video in October? No problem at all. How about an 80s, 90s and 2000s Halloween and Halloween adjacent movie montage? Everybody loves a montage. Great, consider it done, boss. Hi boss. Yes, of course, I won't forget to remind people watching that if they like this sort of thing, they can subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with everything coming over the next year and beyond from Culture Slice. But for now, let's get back to the story of Teen Wolf and explore if the franchise dreams of the film's backers could actually become a reality. By early 1986, as Back to the Future became a bigger and bigger hit all across the globe, it became increasingly clear that Michael J. Fox would not be prioritizing a Teen Wolf sequel as part of his slate for the rest of the decade. Maintaining his role in Family Ties up until 1989, it wouldn't be long before he was also cast in not only star vehicles like The Secret of My Success, but also more serious fare such as Brian De Palma's Casualties of War. There was of course also the inevitable Back to the Future 2 on the horizon, and with Part 1 netting over $300 million in cinemas, that was one of the biggest movies Hollywood could produce. The werewolf comedy sequel just couldn't compete. But Teen Wolf did have brand building in its sights, so a sequel would be greenlit without its star. It wasn't just a follow-up film on the way though. An animated TV series arrived in 1986. Obviously Michael J. Fox didn't return for it, but neither did almost all of the rest of the cast. It ran for 2 seasons, at a time when cartoon spin-offs from movies were becoming absolutely in vogue, and I remember quite enjoying it as a kid. It seems like the general consensus nowadays is that it was pretty good too. The direct Teen Wolf sequel we did get went into production at Atlantic on uncertain ground. Original director Rod Daniel has stated that he wasn't asked to return, but given he had some cachet in Hollywood now, you get the feeling that he still would have elected to move on regardless. He ended up making the body swap comedy Like Father Like Son, starring Kirk Cameron and Dudley Moore, which would make $34 million at the box office in the autumn of 1987. Atlantic releasing, the studio behind Teen Wolf was starting to creak under the strain of financial troubles despite their 1985 surprise hit, which would end up impacting the marketing rollout for Teen Wolf 2. with their lead star and director gone, along with the original screenwriters Loeb and Wiseman, who were, by this point, delivering the stories for films like Commando. Teen Wolf 2 soon became a sequel, starting almost completely from scratch. The man who would fill the director's chair for Part 2, or Part 2, would be Christopher Leach. Largely working in TV in the 80s, making episodes of the likes of Moonlighting and Alfred Hitchcock Presents, he had made a couple of movies in the late 70s, the blaxploitation flick The Hitter and the Telly Savalas action movie Border Cop. So it was a somewhat random choice for a teen werewolf sequel, but we were where we were by this point. Also moving over from TV was screenwriter Tim Kring, credited as R. Timothy Kring, who had got his start writing episodes of shows like Knight Rider, but this was his first film script. If Teen Wolf 2 could become a hit, then this was the ticket both needed to make Hollywood movies full time. Clearly, the replacement of the lead actor was going to be key here. Michael J. Fox had carried the first part to success, so they cast a type, choosing Jason Bateman to play the part of Todd, the cousin of Michael J. Fox's character. Bateman, like Fox, was an 80s teen idol thanks to his work on TV sitcoms. I mean, Bateman's sister Justine was starring with Fox in Family Ties. Synergy or what? So there was a logic there, but also the sense that they were attempting to capture lightning in a bottle for a second time. But Bateman hadn't made a film before, and he also didn't have a Back to the Future coming up on the release schedule. Teen Wolf 2 was produced by Kent Bateman. Wait, Bateman? No wonder he got the job. Kent is Jason's dad. Anyway, given that this was a new story and a clean slate, very few cast members returned the second time around. There was James Hampton as Todd's Uncle Howard, the father of Michael J. Fox in Part 1, and Mark Holton's Chubby, a pretty fun addition to the first movie who works fine here. Though, spoiler alert, they have weaker material to work with. As Teen Wolf 2 unfolds, you realise just how closely it follows the template of its predecessor. It is, in many ways, essentially the same film. Bateman's Todd is a university student this time who has been accepted on a scholarship. He isn't cool or sporty, but Coach Finstock, the basketball coach character from the first film, who is now working at the university, training boxers, and is played by a completely different actor, with Jay Tarsis being replaced by Paul Sand, hopes that the family werewolf gene Todd brings with him will improve his cratering boxing team. So it's basketball last time, boxing this time. Todd just wants to be a vet really, but Coach Finstock is getting pressured for success by John Astin's dean of the university. Todd has a wolf up episode at a uni event, becomes a massive outcast, but then it happens again at just the right time to win his first boxing match by knockout. Todd is suddenly the man. Wolf fever hits just as it had done for Scott in Part 1, and Todd falls into the same trappings, despite the fact that Nikki, played by Estee Chandler, is seemingly the perfect girl for him. Can Todd realise what's truly important in life, and can he lead his team to the championship, even if it's without his werewolf alter ego? This all sounds very familiar. Some details differ, but the arc is the same, the outcome is the same. Bateman's character's best friend is also Styles, but this time he's played by Stuart Fratkin. There's a popular girl, Beth Ann Miller, that Todd fancies, who has another meathead boyfriend, played by Robert Neary, that he also ends up facing in the climactic sporting event. There's even a moral lesson scene from Scott's dad. I mean, I've watched a lot of sequels in my time, but this does seem like excessive crossover, even for 80s Hollywood. Teen Wolf 2 went into production in early 1987, just as Bateman's star was rising thanks to his new show, The Hogan Family. Similarly budgeted to Part 1, Atlantic Releasing was pinning all its hopes on another hit when it rolled out in North American cinemas on November 20th, 1987. Critical reviews signaled trouble ahead. Analysis cited a relentlessly idiotic sequel with remote direction, witless dialogue and charmless characters.
The problem with Teen Wolf 2 is that it's just an overstuffed gimmick film. The teachers who want him to win the boxing title compete with time for the love story. It's just not a good film.
It's a lousy film. In fact, I know why they had it as why he was a boxer. That's because you need to hire fewer extras to be in the crowd than if he were a football player.
Dave Kerr in the Chicago Tribune concluded that what was instinctive in the original has become self-conscious and calculated in the follow-up, and the spirit is gone. That spirit was even further gone when the box office numbers started coming in, opening in 6th place to roughly half the box office of the first Teen Wolf. The movie slinked out of the top 10 after one more week and was gone from theatres by early December. Seriously, they should have released this thing before Halloween, not just for the potential tie-in, but could you not have also thought about a random YouTube video in almost 40 years' time when you decided to release this after Halloween? Anyway, let's not beat around the bush here. Teen Wolf 2 is a bad film. I'm not sure it'll rank that highly in the eventual Sequelpalooza worst sequels of all time, but that episode is probably years away from happening anyway, and Lord only knows what crimes against cinema we'll have covered by that point. It's not aggressively nasty or in your face, but it's all a bit awkward and rubbish. The best part of the movie is probably the romance between Todd and Nikki, but that is lost in a sludge of unfunny jokes and uncomfortable nonsense and feels like it's from a completely different movie. Some of the cast have mentioned that there were earlier versions with more jokes and less copy and pasting from the first movie, but in the end, what we got has absolutely no reason to exist when it essentially traces over the work of the first film, colours it all in a slightly different shade, and then presents it in a far less appealing sum of parts. Atlantic Releasing struggled to replicate the marketing push of Part 1, but even if they'd have had a bigger budget, this was always unlikely to go anywhere. It found a second life on video and cable TV, largely thanks to the popularity of the first movie, and has been packaged up as a double feature with its much more liked precursor, but it has been categorised as a card-carrying member of the sequel Hall of Shame. It's very obvious why it didn't resonate with audiences upon release. In more recent years, Jason Bateman has been reflective about the disaster zone that was Teen Wolf 2. There's so many things that made that probably me included. That was a real stinker. I mean, come on, you could smell that one from a mile away. Really, the cleverest thing about the sequel is its title. Using 2, as in T-O-O, rather than the number 2, is the kind of play on words that does fill my cold heart with a little joy. It's not nearly enough to save this movie, of course, and it's hardly something Shakespeare would be proud of, but it's a very small partial credit on an otherwise disastrous undertaking. And when that's one of the highlights, you're definitely howling at the moon by that point.
If you had had proper management as a kid, I would imagine you'd have a lot more money saved.
Right.
Your affairs would have been handled differently. Planning would have been involved.
I would not have done Teen Wolf 2.
Thank you, and welcome to another episode of Did You Know? On today's show, the story of the female-led Teen Wolf films we didn't get to see. Did you know that not one but 2 gender-swapped Teen Wolf follow-up movies could have surfaced in the late 1980s? Firstly, we missed out on another direct Teen Wolf film, with the plan being for young 80s teen idol Alyssa Milano to step into the shoes of Michael J. Fox and star as a female football-playing werewolf. In fact, both the Scott and Todd characters were set to join the young Who's the Boss star in the prequel of the series. No word on if Fox and Bateman were tapped up to return, but for vastly differing reasons, I'd say that was unlikely to happen on both counts. I mean, I guess this concept could have worked out alright, but we'll never know either way, as the movie didn't get beyond the initial planning stage. Secondly, comes a film which actually did get made, but one that strayed fairly far from the Teen Wolf template. Rather than a direct sequel, Teen Witch was initially conceived as a gender-swapped rip-off of Teen Wolf, from a pitch delivered within the film's production team. That idea ended up being developed into a very different, separate movie for another studio, one full of musical numbers and serious fashion choices, which would eventually be released in 1989 to basically no box office and scathing reviews. Teen Witch has, however, gone on to gain a cult status amongst fans. We didn't get either concept as originally planned back then, but if you ask fans of Teen Witch, they'll tell you that what we did get was one of the best movies ever, one that taps into being a teenager in a way few other films come close to. Others now see it as so bad that it actually somehow becomes good, while TV Guide's review at the time noted that one keeps waiting for something interesting to happen in Teen Witch, but it never does. It's certainly one of the most 80s movies ever, but I'll leave it up to you to decide whether that is a really good thing or a really, really bad one. Well, that's all we've got time for today. Join us next time on Did You Know? In the 1980s, Hollywood had a general rule of thumb when it came to sequels. If the second one earned 75% of the returns delivered by the original film, then it would be considered a success. Clearly, Teen Wolf 2 didn't achieve that financially, but if we're being charitable, then creatively, it got to maybe 25% of the first movie. Teen Wolf isn't a laugh riot or anything, but it is genuinely funny at times, and you root for the protagonist. That doesn't end up really being the case as much in the sequel. Teen Wolf 2's comedy is forced and rarely, if ever, lands at all. The character development is also minimal in part 2. Feels like the first film covered a fairly large amount of ground, but there is little of that the second time around. The direction and pacing are pedestrian at best in the follow-up as well. If Teen Wolf 2 had attempted to present a new angle, maybe given the sequel a more edgy, cooler aesthetic, with its lead teetering on the line between hero and villain, it could have sustained a level of intrigue which just wasn't there with the movie that we got. Instead, they went the route of plagiarizing what had worked before and ended up being left in the lurch at the crazy golf course. Or something. The soundtrack for the first film is, I would say, an underrated 80s hidden gem. Miles Goodman, a really underappreciated composer, provides some legitimately fantastic synth-led numbers for the score, and other bangers like James House's Flesh on Fire made it a winner all around. It's topped off by the iconic Win in the End by Mark Saffin, which gets you far more pumped for the climactic basketball match than you have any right to be, and wouldn't be out of place in any 80s film you could name. Although the music in part 2 doesn't quite compare, it is probably one of the most interesting things about the film. Speaking of music, the party scene in Teen Wolf 2, even if there is a slight strange sense of nostalgic fun in it, encapsulates the random awkwardness of so much of the movie. And when exactly did Todd and his dancers have the time to learn all this choreography? Rod Daniel, director of the original Teen Wolf, would end up seeing that first movie as the high watermark of his film career. Going on to direct the Jim Belushi and Jerry the Dog buddy cop film K9, and the Joe Pesci commercial and critical disaster The Super, he would eventually find himself in his own Sequelpalooza, making both Beethoven's Second and Home Alone 4 before quitting the industry, though he did avoid making the K9 sequels K911 and K9PI. And yes, these are real movies, and yes, they aren't nearly as enjoyable as the original.
I don't want to have to mount you.
Teen Wolf was the one movie he would truly cherish until his passing in 2016. His views on the film not long after its release remained true for the rest of his life. I'm so proud of Teen Wolf. It was a chance for me to start over. It really was a well-written script. It makes a little statement. It's a clean, classy little movie. In the roll call of bad sequels, one of the most often recurring underlying issues is that replacing your lead actor is a supremely risky move. And I'm not sure there are many better examples of this than Teen Wolf 2. It's a prime case of Hollywood's obsession with creating a sequel at all costs, a trend driven by the increasing influence of large corporations and Wall Street in the film industry at the time. Without Michael J. Fox or any sort of genuine idea to move the story on, what we're left with is a far inferior retread that follows the narrative of Part 1 far too closely. The original Teen Wolf really shouldn't have worked as well as it did. The story is throwaway, the wolf makeup is a bit ridiculous, and the script and direction aren't mind-blowing, but it still somehow works. I guess that somehow is the undefinable difference that a well-matched star can bring to a finished movie. Months prior to the release of Teen Wolf 2, Michael J. Fox continued to reiterate his star power with another comedy film, 1987's The Secret of My Success, which he headlined to 5 consecutive weeks at the top of the North American box office and over $111 million worldwide, despite less than glowing reviews. The contrast with Teen Wolf 2 could not have been more stark, sadly.
You know what's funny? I wanted you to become the wolf more than anybody else, so I guess I'm partly to blame for what you've become.
What have I become?
A jerk, Todd.
Jason Bateman is clearly a massively talented actor, both comedic and serious, as his considerable resume has ably demonstrated. Teen Wolf 2, however, was the wrong job at the wrong time for him, and it probably came too early. It's just one of those things, I guess. There is a question around how wrong it really went for Teen Wolf as a franchise in the longer term. MTV brought the story of Teen Wolf back with a darker, dramatic, supernatural tone in 2011, and that ran for 6 seasons and spawned a spin-off film for Paramount Plus in 2023. I'd wager that this isn't the last we'll see of Teen Wolf as a concept either. It taps into a sense of being different in the formative years of your life that is pretty universal. So money has certainly been made along the way. Someone has made a killing from Teen Wolf over the decades. Whether through luck or circumstance, the original Teen Wolf managed to book one of the most iconic movie stars of the 80s just prior to them blowing up. The timing could not have been better, and the success it drove for the film instigated one of the most unnecessary sequels ever made. In the words of its own headliner, you could smell that one from a mile away. It's a shame the sequel couldn't shapeshift into a film you could really sink your teeth into. Hi boss. Great, thank you. Yeah, the episode's all done now. Looking forward to clocking off for the weekend. Any plans? Uh-huh. Sorry, what's that? It's time to start work on the Christmas episode?
Merry Christmas, you filthy animal.